I chair the QBRS Steering Committee, which is a task force of the ISBR Standards Committee. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes telling you about the new Qualification in Biorepository Science, or QBRS exam, which was created by ISBR and the ASEP-BOC, which is short for the American Society for Clinical Pathology Board of Certification, for biobanking professionals like yourselves. So if we could have the next slide. And I'm just very briefly, I'm putting up the mission of ISBR, which includes opportunities for quality in education, and certainly would include the development of an instrument like this. If we can have the vision, the next slide. So it's a leading global biobanking forum that for promoting harmonized high-quality standards education, ethical principles, and innovation in the science and management of biorepositories. So this really accounts for the rationale, the overall rationale for the development of this exam. If we can have the next slide. So what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes is, to begin with, the rationale for and development of the QBRS exam. I'm going to talk a little bit about the application process and resources, the requirements for exam application, the scope of the examination, the exam process and details, what the advantages of the QBRS credential are from our perspective, and then there will be time for a few questions at the conclusion of this. Next slide. So ISBR and ASEP-BOC have joined forces because we are complementary in terms of this development. ISBR is the leading international society promoting and focusing on quality in biobanking. The American Society for Clinical Pathology Board of Certification provides excellence in global medical laboratory professional certification. ISBR and ASEP-BOC have together created a qualification exam for biobanking professionals, and it's designated as the QBRS, the Qualification in Biorepository Science. Next. So following, the rationale for the QBRS exam is as follows. Modern biobanking is a complex activity that requires highly trained and skilled staff. Well-trained staff are essential to ensure high-quality biospecimens for biobanking derivations such as precision medicine, biomarker development, and biomedical research as a whole. Prior to the QBRS exam, there was no formal qualification that existed to define the level required to ensure quality in technical biobanking skills. Next slide. So how did this all happen? Following detailed discussion between ISBR and ASEP-BOC, MOU was signed in the fall of 2017. The exam work group was proposed to ASEP after a detailed search for ISBR volunteers to serve had been conducted. And the work group members generally had to be an experienced practicing biobanker or an individual with expertise in the principles and practice of biobanking. Next slide. So work group members were responsible for developing, reviewing, and updating the biobanking item bank, performing that's the question bank, performing job task analyses, and updating the examination content guidelines, eligibility requirements, and candidate experience documentation forms that might be required. Next, the exam work group, which consists of 8 members who were chosen with geographical and professional diversity in mind by ISBR, were proposed and accepted by the ASEP-BOC Board of Governors, and the exam work group members are appointed for a 3-year term, renewable. Next. Annually, the work group provides a report to the ASEP-BOC Board of Governors and a program report to the ISBR Board of Directors. Broad oversight of the activities of this initiative is provided by a steering committee of ISBR members with appropriate background and standards development, appointed as a subgroup or task force of the ISBR Standards Committee. ASCP-BOC is represented on this committee by the Executive Director of the ASCP-BOC. Next, the exam work group has set the parameters for the exam, developed the supporting documents for the application process, including information about the scope of the exam, and has created and standardized exam questions. The steering committee has reviewed and provided comment on the supporting materials as it was developed in order to clarify and focus the content. And we'll be talking about all of this in more detail shortly. Next slide. So the QBRS exam began in earnest in December of 2018 and was facilitated by face-to-face and online meetings of the exam work group. The certificate program for QBRS was completed within a year and made available for application in January of 2020. The exam itself became available for candidates to take in April of 2020. By March of 2021, 20 applicants have passed or are in process to be awarded the QBRS certificate so that they can put ASCP QBRS after their name. One applicant was deficient. While the majority of the successful applicants have been from North America, 2 are from Hong Kong and 1 from the United Arab UAE. Next, we'll have this a little bit later at the end, but the application form and resource documents for the QBRS exam are available both at the ISBR website as shown or at the ASCP-BOC website as shown. And either can the documentation required and the background information can be obtained at either website. And the resource details, which are shown on the next slide, include the application form, the requirements for eligibility and eligibility assessment. There is a work experience documentation form. Every applicant has to have his work experience attested to by the biobank that they work in. There is a list of regional accrediting bodies for North American colleges and universities, as well as for those outside North America. And that's quite detailed and explains how you go about determining the accreditation of your organization and how you can validate that. There is an examination topic outline, which is quite detailed, and a list of suggested reading for exam preparation, which includes journals, texts, and online materials. There is also a frequently asked questions piece in both websites, or in either website, which is quite useful and would fill in the gaps in which I'm not able to talk to you about in a limited period of time today. Next slide. Now there are 6 routes that one can take to qualify for examination, for the QBRS examination. And generally speaking, the requirements prior to application include both academic and work experience documentation. And you can see that if you have an ASCP technologist certification, this generally reduces the amount of full-time acceptable experience in a biorepository that you require. You do need some sort of academic qualification as well. And lastly, there is, for the first several years, a possibility to do this. If you just got into biobanking a long time ago and do not have an academic or an ASCP qualification. We'll go through these in a little bit more detail right now. If I can have the next, and by the way, this slide deck will be available on the ISBR website. So Route 1 requires an ASCP technologist or specialist certification, as well as a baccalaureate degree, as denoted there, and 1 full year of full-time acceptable experience in a biorepository within the last 5 years. Next slide details Route 2, which is a baccalaureate degree as described above and 2 years of full-time acceptable experience in a biorepository. So if you don't have the ASCP technologist certification in some lab discipline, then you need an additional year of acceptable experience in a biorepository. Route 3 is similar, except this denotes either a master's degree or a PhD, and in this case, just 1 full year of full-time acceptable experience in a biorepository. Next. Route 4, again, goes back to the ASCP technologist certification, and in this case, an associate degree or two-year diploma from a regionally accredited college or university, or 60 semester hours of academic credit, including a combination of 12 semester hours in biology and chemistry, and again, 2 years of full-time acceptable experience in a biorepository. Route 5 is similar. It does not include, you do not need the ASCP technologist certification for this, but the experience in a biorepository increases to 3 years from 2 years. And finally, Route 6, which can be considered a grandparent clause. If I can have the next slide. It just requires high school graduation or equivalent and 5 full years of full-time acceptable experience in a biorepository within the last 10 years. This is for people who have been working in a biorepository for a long time, a relatively long period of time, and have not had an opportunity or did not do an academic route prior to that. The next slide. The biorepository experience is required in at least 4 of the 9 areas listed. And this includes subject consent, specimen and data collection, specimen and data de-identification, data processing and specimen processing, sample and data storage, sample and data distribution, quality control, equipment quality control, including maintenance, validation, calibration, or if you have experience in an enhanced technical area, such as histology, tissue microarray, slide imaging, microdissection, viable cell isolation, or nucleic acid or protein extraction. So you need to have experience in 4 of those areas in order to qualify to write the examination. Talking about, on the next slide, the scope of the examination. The exam questions encompass the major content areas within biorepository science, including specimen handling, including collection, processing, and storage, sample and data inventory management and quality control, safety and infection control, and biorepository operations. The scope document on the website provides further detail of possible topics within each of these areas and is quite detailed, actually. Each of these topic areas will comprise 25 to 30% of the exam questions, except for biorepository operations, which will be slightly less. There are 50 questions in total on the examination, and the questions may be theoretical or procedural. Next. So the exam is a 50-question multiple choice time test that is self-administered on your own computer on the date and time of your choice within the 60-day examination period indicated on your admission notification following a successful application. That is, you make your application, and once it's approved, they send you a notice, and then you have 60 days in which you can take the test. The cost for application is $240 US, and the examination may be reattempted if initially unsuccessful. QBRS certificate holders will be required to revalidate their qualification every 3 years, simply by documentation of required continuing education or other educational activities as defined by ASCP BOC on their website. So the next slide What are the advantages of the QBRS credential? Well, we think that this partnership has facilitated the development of the global QBRS credential program, which will become an essential piece of establishing the future for sustainable quality biobanking. We know that standards and best practices have had a major role in developing sustainable quality biobanking. This is the other side of the equation, talking about biobanking professionals and their training and how that contributes to quality biobanking. The QBRS designation earned by biobankers will establish their ability to provide skilled work as a benchmark quality biorepository scientist. And we believe that the QBRS will become the standard which defines the required level of quality in biobankers and assures sustained quality in biobanking. The frequently asked, that's the next slide. Now, just to give you some indication, in the frequently asked questions section of the websites on either website, these are the questions that are there at the present time. They probably will be modified and updated with time. Why was the qualification in Biorepository Science exam created? Who can take the exam? How do you apply? What information is required and why? When will the application and exam be available? Well, it is already available. What happens if I'm not successful on the first try? Is recertification required over time? How should I prepare for the exam? How is the exam scored? When will I get the results of the exam? What is the difference between the ISBER Essentials of Biobanking course and the QBRS exam? What is the difference between an ASCP qualification and a certification? Are there plans to translate the QBRS into other languages? Do non-US applicants have to provide a social security number in their application process? And I can tell you the answer to that is no. How does ASCP BOC protect data? This, of course, could be an issue for EU applicants because of GDPR regulations, but we've determined that that is not an issue. The other thing that I'm, just as a tip, that I'm going to tell you, on the ASCP BOC website and available at the at the website for the QBRS or in other areas, there is a document called Procedures for Examination and Qualification, which details all of the things that I have talked about. It gives you great detail about that. Procedures for Examination and Qualification. Next slide. So at this point, that's sort of a short resume of the QBRS exam. And we have, I think, a few minutes for questions.
So Brent, you have a couple questions. Is the program open for those who are just starting a biobank?
For those that are just, you mean for those that are just starting a biobank? Well, the as I mentioned, the qualification requires that you have some experience in a biobank. So if there's someone that has trained in a biobank and subsequently begins to set up their own biobank, certainly if they otherwise meet the qualifications, both academically and for a length of training, they could write the exam. I hope that's the sense of the question.
And is the exam an open book test?
Well, theoretically it is. As I say, you're doing it at the end of your own computer. I think that it would probably, if you do adequate workup for the exam, as indicated by the scope and the reading materials, you really shouldn't need an open book. And particularly if you have the academic qualifications and biorepository experience. I think the experience to date has been very good in terms of the percentage of individuals that have completed the exam successfully. I think that in a sense it's an honor system. I think that the preference would be that you would do it without an open book. But on the other hand, a lot of biobanking is done by reference to best practices and standards.
So we had one question: will we be recorded taking the test to prevent using books? I don't think we're going to reach in, are we?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that, Marion.
There's no recording of your taking the test, correct?
No, I don't think so. We do, I mean, ISBR is provided with the names and contact details for the successful applicants. And I think that the intention is at the ISBR annual meeting to recognize those that have received the QBRS credential. The other thing that I can tell you is that we are currently in the process of recording a testimonial from one of the successful applicants who has actually volunteered themselves to provide that because they think because they really feel that it's really improved their career opportunities and their self-validation.
So for non-American applicants, how can you determine if qualifications and experience will meet the eligibility requirements before applying?
Well, again, on the website, there is a document called Regional Accredited Colleges and Universities. And on the first page of the document, it really refers to the United States and Canada. But if you look right at the end of the document, there's a link to something called Acceptable Evaluation Agency for Foreign Transcripts. And if you click on that link, you will have a list of, it looks like about a dozen acceptable evaluation agencies for foreign transcripts that are listed. So you can take your choice of which one. I'm just going to mention one: Foreign Academic Credential Services, Foreign Credential Services of America. So these are companies that are experienced in assessing credentials. I have to tell you also that I know that ASCP BOC can be very helpful if there's a gray area or some issue that comes up.
So they can contact, is there a contact email on the web?
I think there is within the ASCP BOC website. I think you can find a contact.
Okay.
I know you can actually.
What's the time limit for taking the exam once you've started?
Well, as I mentioned, there is once you complete your application and it is accepted, you will receive a notification by email. And with that notification, you then have 60 days to actually sign in with your login and take the exam. And the exam itself, I think, is 90 minutes and 50 questions. So you have 60 days to do the exam.
Okay.
That's your convenience.
So the next question is, I tried applying this year for Route 5. I have an associate's degree in biology and 3 years experience in biobanking. My application was denied because I didn't have enough chemistry hours. Did this change this year? Because I now see it says associate's degree or 60 hours.
Yeah, you can, well, the 60 semester hours has to include at least 12 semester hours in biology and chemistry. If you're unsuccessful in qualifying via Route 5, I would suggest you take a look at Route 6, which only requires high school and I think 5 years of experience in a accredited or in an acceptable experience in a biorepository. 5 years within, it's 5 years or 6 years. I'm looking. 5 years of full-time acceptable experience within the last 10 years. So that's another way to get around that if you don't have sufficient chemistry hours.
But I believe that you had said that there was an adjustment of the routes recently, and so maybe that's what the person's seeing. Might that be in terms of qualifications?
Well, the adjustment was that routes 4 and 5 were added, and Route
Okay.
6.
Okay.
Those were added last October, but I don't think they've changed since then. I'm not aware of any change since then.
Okay. And does the qualification have an expiration date?
Well, as I say, the only contingency with this is that every 3 years you have to show evidence of continuing education, and that's the documentation of attending, usually just of attending various seminars or workshops. And it's quite frankly, it's not very stringent. I don't have all the details of it right here, but it won't be terribly onerous. You just have to do that every 3 years, and then your QBRS credential will be extended.
Okay. And is the exam required to operate a biobank?
No, it really has nothing to do with biobank operation. This qualification is for the requisite quality skill set of biorepository professionals. In other words, accreditation or certification of biobank, the biobank is one aspect of quality. This is another aspect of quality, which really reflects on the level of experience and of the people that actually work within the biobank.
And the last question I have is, can the test be taken at any time of year? Or are there only certain phases during the year that it's open?
No, it can be taken, as I say, the only proviso is that when you receive notice of that your application has been approved, you have 60 days to take the exam. So if it's approved in June, you have June and July. In September, you have September and October. So it's available year-round.
And I have a new question. Do you have a list of classes or seminars for CMP?
No, I don't. But I think that anything that is produced by an academic organization, or even or that has some form to it, I think would be acceptable, as long as you receive documentation. For example, if you go to an ISBR annual meeting and you attend a workshop like this, and you receive documentation that you attended the workshop, that would probably qualify.
Can the exam be rescheduled if my exam date no longer works?
My guess, I don't know the answer to that question. That would be up to ASCP BOC. My guess is if there were extenuating circumstances, that you could make that argument to ASCP BOC, and my guess is that they would probably be flexible on that.
Okay. Let's see. Will the QBRS qualification be considered as proof of competency for staff for the ISO standard 20387, which is the biobanking accreditation?
Well, it's proof of competency as being able to work within a biobanking lab. ISO 20387, which is obviously benchmark for the biobank itself, or you can be accredited to 20387. But 20387 really has standards within it with respect to the education and training, really of biobanking professionals, QBRS would serve as adequate, more than adequate documentation of quality training for a biobanking professional within the context of ISO 20387.
And the last question, and then we'll move on, is how many hours are required every 3 years for CMO or CMP?
I don't have that number exactly. As a matter of fact, with regard to that, I think ASCP BOC is simply is currently considering that. They obviously have experience with other exams, but I don't know whether they've actually documented it, because obviously no one that has taken the exam within the last year is at this point required to renew just yet. They've got another 2 years at least. And I think that the exam work group within QBRS is obviously going to be taking up that question within the next year or two.
Okay. And the last question was, what is the pass score?
I think that I honestly, I think it's around 70%, but I think it would vary from time to time. And I know that that ASCP BOC does very careful analysis of exam results. They have to wait until there are enough people that have taken the exam, but they have very clear criteria for what would be adequate to require a pass on the exam. And that's information that I just don't have access to. It's proprietary as far as I know.
Okay. So we're going to close off the questions. We thank you, Brent, for all of your great explanation of the program. You can find the program on the ISBR website. And if you have any other questions, please either ask them in the forum, ask them back to the head office where you applied, ask them to the ASCP BOC, to the contact, and go look at the FAQs on the website. So I hope you do attempt to try this exam. I think I've actually been touting it within my own organization, saying this would be a great thing for some of our staff.